Cheryl, at the top of your screen, can you just hit record on the Zoom? It's on pause, so it should be a play.
I'm pressing the wrong one.
See it?
Hang on. Yeah, I'm just pressing the wrong. There we go.
Recording in progress.
It's spinning. Okay, excellent. Good evening. So tonight is September 18th, and we're here for the first round of our zoning bylaw information sessions. So for anyone who does not know me, I am Heather Monroe. I'm the town administrator. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. We have people in person as well as via Zoom this evening. Just to give a little history. So back in 2023, we organized the zoning bylaw steering group to help guide the revision of our zoning bylaws, including addressing the MBTA zoning bylaw requirement using funds from a state earmark. With the steering group's support, we hired CMRPC, Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission, to assist with this effort. The core group has included representatives from CMRPC, Neil Bagdis, Chair of the Planning Board, Roberta Bryan, Chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals, Cheryl Lombardi, our Town Services Coordinator, and myself as Town Administrator. We've also benefited from the insights and input of various town leaders, including Fire Chief Mike Pingatori, DPW Director Travis Tebow, Building Commissioner Dave Carl, Paxton Municipal Light Plant Manager Tara Rondu, and Economic Development Committee Representatives Savas and Jeremy Richards. We've been meeting at least once a month since early fall 2023, and we're now nearing the final stages of our work. One of the main reasons we tackled this project was to provide much-needed updates to our bylaws while also ensuring that we are more business-friendly and less prohibitive, supporting economic growth in Paxton. Tonight, one of our goals is to inform the public about the proposed changes, hear your thoughts, ideas, and concerns, and gather suggestions to bring back to the planning board. We will review several key sections of the proposed zoning bylaw changes over the next several weeks, grouping each by category. Tonight's sections will cover are sections 1, 3, 4, 6, 7, 13, and 14. For each section, we'll provide an overview, which is supported by some handouts for those in the room that detail the proposed changes, and then we'll open the floor for input and questions. Once we've addressed those, we'll move on to the next section. Our aim is to keep this session focused and wrap up within an hour and a half. For those who want to review the materials in more detail, the handouts along with redline versions of the zoning bylaws are available on our website, and for those in person, there's a QR code at the top of the information sheets that link you directly to the redlined bylaws. It's also important to note that this is not the final version of the zoning bylaws. The planning board will hold a formal hearing on the final revised versions of the proposed changes around October 29th at 7 p.m. Once the final amended versions are approved by the planning board, they'll be incorporated into the town meeting warrant articles for consideration at the special town meeting on November 18th. Thank you for being part of this process. Let's get started. So what I'd like to do for each of these sections, I'm just going to go over some highlights from the informational sheets, and then we're going to have Jane from CMRPC come up, and we'll put on the screen the red line versions, and she'll walk us through some of the major changes, and then we'll be able to hear from folks if there's any questions or any input or any thoughts anyone may have. So the first section is definitions. So definitions for reference throughout the zoning bylaw are all included into this one section, so a lot of pieces were moved from other locations to this one location. And some of the definitions were also updated in order to make sure that they continue to comply with Mass General laws. In doing this, it has made it easier, the goal is that it makes it easier for readers to both find and see the definitions all in one location and make sure that they're in compliance. Proposed changes include moving a few very specific sections that had their own law definitions into this one, and that included the Watershed Protection Overlay District in Section 4, signs in Section 5, wireless services from Section 8, inclusionary housing from Section 10, and large-scale ground-mounted solar installations from Section 11. The recommendation of the committee was to relocate all of these definitions into one spot. With that, I'm going to have Jane come up from CMRPC, and I'm going to put on the board the red line version. Thank you, Jane. Just give me 1 second to hit go.
Good evening. I'm Jane Wyrick, Land Use Planner with Central Mass Regional Planning Commission. Happy to answer any of your questions tonight. I'll just wait until Heather puts up the red line version so we can walk through that. So one of the original purposes for zoning was to protect the public health, safety, and general welfare. And so with the introduction, we're just adding some additional language to include those items. We also have a statement about severability, and that means if any one section of this section is found to not be in accordance with the law, that everything else in the chapter is still legal and valid. So you may have heard, and we're going to speak about it in a different meeting, that the state just passed a new housing bond bill, or the Housing Act, as it's also known. And part of that includes funding for different programs to promote building more housing in the state. It also allows for accessory dwelling units by right across the state as long as it meets certain criteria. So we are looking to adopt a new definition for accessory dwelling units. I can't even read that one.
Jane, do you want the hard copy in front of you?
We pull that podium up, is that better? You don't have to.
Or you can walk with a microphone.
I can walk with a microphone. That
That's an
works.
idea, yeah.
Oh, it's wireless too. As you see on some of these, it'll say an affordable housing unit at the end. It's relocated from section 10.2, inclusionary housing. So there are notations if it's an existing definition that was elsewhere in the bylaws and is just moved into this section so that they're all in one place. Develop new definitions for affordable housing. Some of the formatting was a little confusing where the section, the subsection, and the subsection were all in numerals, which made it kind of confusing. So we're changing some of the formatting to like 1A and then a small a, et cetera. For the site plan or special permit, there's a new definition for applicant, as well as area median income. The area of sign, just changed the title of it. It had been relocated from the sign section, and that section had numbered all of the signs. So to be consistent, we took the numbering away and just have it alphabetical. As of right means that it's permitted, a permitted use, does not require a special permit. Automobile refueling station is also known as a gas filling station. We just did not have a definition for that term before. Clarifying what a bed and breakfast inn is compared to a boarding house or a lodging house. Building coverage is the maximum area of the lot that can be attributed to the footprint. That's a new housing definition. There was not a definition for basement or cellar. The definition that it's existing is story above grade, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page as far as the terminology. We just included that notation. Childcare facility, which are allowed by right for 6 and fewer children. There are other requirements for larger facilities. Clearview Triangle just says that where 2 streets come to intersect together, or where a driveway intersects a street, there should be an area that is free of any obstructions, whether it's signs or vegetation, that would reduce the driver's visibility as they're trying to pull out onto a street. Compliance guidelines, that is referring to the multifamily zoning districts for the MBTA zoning, which we'll discuss at a later meeting. Density has to do with the intensity of the use of the land, such as how many units per acre is allowed on a particular property. Gross density would be the total area of the dwelling units per the land. The net would take out some other uses from the site before coming up with the final unit count. And that could include removing wetlands and flood zones. The Department of Housing and Community Development is the former name for this department, which is now known as the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. So we're just making a notation of the name change. New definition for development, any man-made change to improved or unimproved real estate, including but not limiting the building or structures. And development standards would be such as what we have in Section 16F, which would be with the new multifamily zoning district or overlay district, which would provide parameters for how the site is to be developed. Distribution center is like an industrial facility, like FedEx or UPS or Amazon warehouses. There are no regulations now in the zoning bylaw. This definition would allow a distribution center up to 40,000 square feet. We previously had just single-family dwelling, detached. We did not have one for attached. Technically, a condominium or a townhouse, even though they're attached to each other, they are considered single-family, so we just created the distinction between those two. And again, this is the acronym for the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, State Office. The floodway is the channel of a river, creek, or a watercourse that's adjacent to land areas where, in the case of flooding, is where the water would flow to. The front lot line, on corner lots, it can be kind of tricky. And it would be determined by which street the front door faces. As far as determining the frontage of a lot of times pie-shaped lots at the end of a cul-de-sac, Even though they angle out to be wider towards the rear, they are more narrow at the front. And so this allows for that front lot frontage to be measured at the front setback line. Functionally dependent is a use which cannot perform its intended use unless it is located or carried out in close proximity to water. And this will be one of the definitions within the floodplain section. We previously mentioned the gas filling station and other terminology, such as automobile refueling station, and so this is just cross-referencing the other definition. Habitable room or dwelling, any room or dwelling unit meeting the requirements of the Massachusetts State Building Code for sleeping, living, cooking, or dining purposes. It just expands this from just a habitable room to a dwelling unit. The definition for height is expanded to provide for sloped lots where you may have a different height at the front and the back of the house, and it allows for averaging of those the height at those four corners to come up with the average height. The highest adjacent grade is the highest natural elevation of ground surface prior to construction of a structure. Historic structure. We have several different sub-definitions. They would have to meet either individually, be on the National Register of Historic Places, be certified by the Secretary of the Interior as contributing to a historic significance of a historic district, individually listed on the state inventory of historic places, individually listed on a local inventory, so there's national, state, and local historic districts. And they would have to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. Definition for hotel, motel, and inn. We were lacking that before, and so it's up to 6 guest rooms for hire. We did not have definitions for industrial use or for the distinction between light and heavy industrial. So the heavy would be involving manufacturing, processing, refining, outdoor storage, or treatment of large equipment or raw hazardous materials, operations that might create noise, pollution, vibration, and/or dust. And light industrial would be a land use for a district that's more suitable for smaller scale manufacturing or processing that is free of noise, odor, dust, smoke, and vibration. Lodging house, we're trying to distinguish between lodging house, boarding house, hotel, motel, as we mentioned earlier, and so we're just trying to distinguish between these different uses. Lot is an area of land with definite boundaries that is used or available for use as the site of a building or buildings. Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority, also known as MBTA. And an MBTA community is one of 177 towns. Within southern Worcester County, we have 14 that are designated as MBTA communities, of which Paxton is considered a small adjacent town. The state has updated the laws regarding marijuana or cannabis, and so these changes to the definitions surrounding marijuana use are to be in accordance with the amendments to state law. And what was formerly known as registered marijuana dispensary is now referred to as medical marijuana treatment center. Mixed-use development is a development containing a mix of residential uses and non-residential uses, including and without limitation, it could be commercial, institutional, industrial, or other uses. Multifamily housing, the definition, according to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, is a building with at least 3 residential dwelling units or 2 buildings with 2 residential dwelling units in each building. That's an error. It should be 2 residential dwelling units in each building. Oh, more than 1. We're good. We're good. A multifamily zoning district is a zoning district that is either a base zoning district or an overlay district in which multifamily housing is allowed as of right. New construction structures for which the start of construction commenced on or after the effective date of the first floodplain management code, regulation, ordinance, or standard. And this is one of the updates. The Department of Conservation and Recreation has developed a new state model floodplain bylaw. And so all of these floodplain changes are to be in compliance with the new state model. We added to the definition of single family to, well, we excluded condominiums and townhouses because we previously had distinguished between attached and detached single family. Open space is contiguous, undeveloped land within a parcel boundary. The previous parking space definition included area for backing and maneuvering around the space, and we've narrowed that down to just the parking space itself now, and are proposing a standard parking space of 9 feet wide and a maximum stall length of 18 feet. The parking surface is 1 or more parking spaces without a built structure above the space. Solar panel designed to be installed above the surface parking space does not count as a built structure for the purposes of this definition. We're changing the term of personal wireless service facility to a wireless communication facility. Just some of the telecommunications are not just personal devices, so we're just making it more generic. Recreational vehicle is a new definition for a vehicle that is built on a chassis, is 400 square feet or less, designed to be self-propelled or towed, and not designed as a permanent dwelling. We previously talked about floodway, which is synonymous with regulatory floodway. Again, another definition that was a man-made lake typically formed by constructing a dam where water is stored for the purposes of flood control, and so this is one of the updates to the floodplain bylaw. Residential dwelling unit is a single unit providing complete, independent living facilities for 1 or more persons, including permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. And Section 3A refers to the section of the Mass General Law or the Zoning Act, Chapter 40A, that refers to MBTA zoning or multifamily zoning. Solar access, the access of solar energy system to direct sunlight. solar energy system, a device or structural design feature, a substantial purpose of which is to provide daylight for interior lighting or provide for the collection, storage, and distribution of solar energy for space heating or cooling, electricity generating, or water heating. Another one of the updates to the floodplain district or overlay district, defining what a special flood hazard area is and what it would be designated as on the flood insurance rate map. Start of construction, the date of issuance for new construction and substantial improvements to existing structures, provided the actual start of construction, repair, reconstruction, rehabilitation, addition, placement, or other improvements is within 180 days after the date of the issuance. Permanent construction does not include land preparation such as clearing, excavation, grading, or filling, the installation of streets or walkways, excavation for a basement, footings, piers, etc. And this is also, I think, in reference to the floodplain. The definition of structure was expanded to be in agreement with the new state model floodplain bylaw. Sub-district is related to the MBTA multifamily zoning and is an area within the district that is geographically smaller than the entire district and differentiated from the rest of the district by other uses, dimensional standards, or development standards. The subsidized housing inventory is a list of qualified affordable housing units maintained by the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, and it's used to measure the community's stock of low or moderate income housing for the purposes of meeting the state law of the goal is for each community to have 10% affordable housing. Substantial repair of a foundation. This was relocated from, can we scroll down just a little bit? From the Watershed Protection Overlay District. And so I believe that may also be updated. I'm not sure if it's floodplain or not. Temporary sign is any sign intended to be maintained for a continuous period of not more than 60 days. That's just an update of the name of the State Department that has to do with housing. A variance is a lawful means to deviate from strict compliance with the current zoning requirements. For the purpose of floodplains, it is a grant of relief by a community from the terms of a floodplain management regulation. And that update is for the floodplain overlay district. Violation, this is also in reference to floodplain, failure of a structure or other development to be fully compliant with the floodplain management regulations. Warehouse is a building or a structure, the primary function of which is to provide for the storage and ultimate distribution without retail sale of materials, merchandise, commodities, goods, and products. Such term for purposes of these bylaws does not mean or include distribution center. Zoning, the ordinances and bylaws adopted by cities and towns to regulate the use of land, buildings, and structures to the full extent of the independent constitutional powers of cities and towns to protect the health, safety, and general welfare of their present and future inhabitants. And that's the end of section 1.
Excellent. Thank you, Jane. Are there any questions in the public on this section? Seeing none, are there any questions on our Zoom community for this section for anyone? All right, seeing that there are none at this time, we're going to move on to section 3. So I'm going to just stand up here in a moment and give that update. and then we will move back to the specifics. All right, so for section 3, it's mostly our use tables. It kind of outlines what can occur in each one of the different zoned areas. We have the residential A, residential B, and commercial areas. Usually in these charts, you're going to see one of 3 general answers. Either it's going to say yes, that it's allowed by special permit or SP, or that it's not allowed at all. And the revisions that the steering committee put together, a lot of things we looked at were just some reformatting of the sections, addressing some of the punctuation, deleting some of the prohibitions of some of the uses, looking at increasing separation requirement between adult businesses and schools, playgrounds, libraries, and religious uses, requiring some approval by the Paxton Municipal Light Department for certain uses relative to connecting to the grid or having potential impact on the electrical distribution system, as well as a myriad of other adjustments. We tried to combine things when they made more sense to be combined in one. We tried to break things out when we were trying to handle specific issues or try to address specific concerns. These regulations are in place in general to protect the public health, the safety, general welfare of community members, and they have to be compatible uses near to each other while keeping others that have a potential impact in districts apart from other uses. So with that, we're going to go through this section. I anticipate there might be some questions as we go through, so we'll go through maybe each subsection, especially when we get to the use tables. We'll pause, see if there's any questions, and then we'll go on to the next section. Jane, you're up.
I'm up. Better up.
Better up. All right, just give me 1 second to share.
Okay. Previously, there was not a designation for the keeping of roosters. I believe it had originally said fur farms there, which doesn't seem to be a relevant use anymore. So in its place, we wanted to distinguish between poultry, larger livestock, and then the roosters. And so 4A, which was the keeping of livestock and poultry, has been divided now into 4A and 4B. And 3 was changed from fur farms to roosters, which would require, all of them would require a special permit.
So Jane, if we can just hold there real quick, because that's, I think, one of the subsections that people may have questions on.
Sure.
We'll see if there's any questions, and then if there are none, we'll move on, and if there are, we'll answer the questions now. Anyone in the public who has questions on this section? Would you like a microphone so people at home can hear you? We've got a variety of them.
Jane, are you familiar with the right to farm laws and how they interplay with zoning bylaws?
Some knowledge of it, yes.
Okay. Were the right to farm bylaws referenced when this section was being changed?
I can make a note of that and make sure we check that.
Because my understanding is Paxton accepted the right to farm laws in
Okay.
1996. And the right to farm laws, I believe, prohibit zoning out of things such as we are currently doing in this version.
We will definitely check that.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add a question or a comment to that? I just want to make sure that, that I understand what right to farm is, and if it's personal farm use as well as commercial farm use. And I think, just for a little bit of background, and my apologies for those who can't see me, Roberta Bryan, Chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals. Our intent, having, especially at Zoning Board of Appeal and having worked with Cheryl for many years now, was to try to quell the chicken complaints and the rooster complaints. And the reason behind our decision on acreage and square footage size of lots was to provide a little bit more buffer between those who had chickens and neighbors. I agree with you that we should definitely note the right to farm bylaws and make sure that we are consistent with that. But I would also be curious as to whether right to farm is of commercial business purposes, even if it's small business, versus personal use and sale of like eggs on a roadside, stand. Just want to make sure that, but just a little background for those who are listening as to our decision-making process, and obviously keeping it open. And the reason for special permit on those that are allowed over 40,000 square feet or even 5 acres or greater is to just control from almost a Board of Health standpoint too. Manure piles, how chickens are, how chicken waste, is disposed of and things like that, to make sure that air quality, noise, smell, and flies in particular, are contained to the best of the town's ability through its permitting and boards.
If I may, can I inquire of the committee the reasoning behind the rooster, the decision to prohibit roosters or require a special permit for roosters?
Simply noise that travels, noise that starts early, and neighbor complaints that have been received by the town about that noise and the consistency of it.
Okay, yeah, so it is a noise issue, which I believe is one of the things that the right to farm laws address. And you raise a valid point with the personal versus commercial. There is a distinction in there. However, any noise related to agriculture can't be zoned out, is my understanding.
Right, and I think we go back to that commercial versus personal to make sure that we're complying with what was voted on in '96.
Yeah, and
Very
then
good.
was the Board of Health consulted? I know you mentioned that the Board of Health, from a Board of Health perspective, that zoning bylaws are intended to help protect public health, but was the Board of Health consulted at all when this was being done?
We did not have a special representative from the Board of Health when we discussed this. It was primarily the committee as it had been formed, and looking at what the complaints had been and how to assist the community in navigating that, because it became a real neighbor-to-neighbor issue in some instances.
I'm the current chair of the Board of Health, so I know that the Board of Health wasn't consulted. However, one of the issues that we have encountered on the Board of Health side that I'd like to communicate to you, since we weren't asked to provide our input yet anyways, is that when we've had complaints related to chickens or livestock, we've had difficulty with being able to enforce anything with them. And part of that is because, number one, a lot of these people who are keeping chickens and whatnot, we're not even aware of, because the way that the bylaws are currently written, it's outright prohibited, right, in most lots. What happens when you do that is you essentially force the issue underground, and now we have no way of monitoring it. So the problem that we're running into now from a public health perspective, I don't know if you're aware, H1N5 is becoming more prevalent, especially in the Midwest states, and it has a tendency to infect not only large livestock but chickens. It's colloquially known as the bird flu, right? So when and if it were to come to our region, if we wanted to get in touch with MDAR, the Mass Department of Agriculture, in order to do flock testing in our town or whatnot, if we don't know who has these, structures on their property or keeps these birds, we have no hope of being able to control that issue. So it's kind of a situation where, when you start being too restrictive on something, you're going to force it underground, and then it creates a public health problem. So just my 2 cents there.
Thank you.
All right, is there anyone at home that would like to add any thoughts on the agricultural section? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Jane, can you go on to, let's see, residential? Let me just get that back up on my screen here.
Okay. Previously, two-family dwellings were not permitted, recommending a change to requiring a special permit. We're also adding a new category for the MBTA community's multifamily dwellings that would be allowed by right in residential districts, but not in the business district.
Great. Are there any questions on that section? We have some folks in the chat. Let's see. Do you see anything there? We do have a question. We do have a question back from the agricultural piece that I didn't see, it's in the chat. And that was just clarification. So does this mean that you would need to have a permit to have one horse?
Yes, you
Yes.
always have.
Yes, and apparently that's the current regulation as well.
Correct.
Okay. All right, so we will move on to community facilities. Jane, let's see what's in here.
No changes.
Keep going.
Business and services.
I think there's any more until 26.
This was just a change to be in agreement with the state law that changed the term from registered marijuana dispensary to medical marijuana treatment center. So we had broken down all of these different accessory uses in the existing bylaws where they don't need to individually be identified. And so we're just removing or deleting just unnecessary language.
While Heather's scrolling, if I could interrupt, Jane, it might be helpful to describe the term grandfathered and how it relates to zoning and how, in this process, whereby you're making changes. Can you just talk about the legal ramifications of previously permitted use, and if those changes are being made, especially in a use table, what the implications are for that property owner or citizen going forward?
So grandfathered would also be pre-existing non-conforming use, which was something that may have been an approved use at the time that it was built or the use started, or it may have been in use before the zoning was ever adopted. And so they would continue to be legally non-conforming. But going forward, any new uses or structures would need to comply with the use table.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that? So for an existing farm that was previously okay, didn't require a special permit according to the zoning bylaws in place at the time that that farm became what was present, if they were to change their farming operation in any way, so say they are going to build a new barn, or they're going to, add a, just for the sake of argument, a pig area or something, would that constitute a change that would require them to now get a special permit?
I'm not sure.
I only caught part of that, I'm sorry, Julia.
Yeah, so for an existing farm that would have been existing non-conforming after the bylaws were changed, assuming that the agriculture section stays the same as it is currently written, if that farming operation were to change in some way, whether it be adding a barn, starting to raise a different type of animal, et cetera, would that then require a special permit? Would that be a substantial enough change to require a permit?
I would expect, we can get clarification on that, but I would think it's similar to any of the other zoning bylaws we have, which is if something was existing and approved and it had something to do with your dwelling, you made some modification that's now prohibited or requires a special permit, you'd have to go through that process to make the change.
I think it also depends on how it was written. If it was pre-zoning, then obviously it wasn't written. in such a way that would detail if you're going to use the animal, type of animal. But I would agree that probably an opinion should be sought on something like that, because if we don't allow pig farms now, and someone wants to convert portion of their previous existing non-conforming use to a pig farm, I think we might have a say in that. That might not be a by right, or just a sort of a rollover of the, but I do agree with Heather that this is probably a good research item.
Yes.
And if I could add to that, usually structures are kind of separated from the animals part of it, so that would be addressed in a different part of the bylaw, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would agree. Neil had just asked whether or not, if suddenly something has been changed to a lesser degree, does a new property owner have to go back and re-permit a structure? So I think structures are definitely in a different category, and if you're not changing the use, then your previously compliant would not become non-compliant at this point.
I agree with that, yes.
So if the property changed ownership, that grandfathering stays with the property? Okay.
Typically, those structure approvals run with the land and not the property owner.
Okay.
Common driveways.
Oh, common driveway, yes. Previously, they were not allowed. We will be seeing in, a little bit later on, a draft common driveway bylaw, and so they would be permitted now.
Distribution center.
And distribution center, as we mentioned with the definition, would be limited to a maximum of 40,000 square feet, and does not receive incoming and outgoing tractor-trailer traffic between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m.
And would only be permitted in the commercial district by special permit.
Yes. We deleted the subsection that states that no filling station, garage, or storage of automobiles, hotel, motel, or overnight cabins, no place of amusement or assembly shall be permitted in any business district. So that would no longer be prohibited.
Jane, just a comment. Heather, could you back up to distribution, right, just previous? Right there. When we had the meetings, I thought we went the other way. We didn't want deliveries in the off hours, meaning overnight and things like, I thought we wanted deliveries only to be made during business times for a distribution center.
That can be changed.
Okay, but does anybody else remember?
Yeah, I think it's just got it reversed.
Okay, that's
So
what
it's
I'm,
limited to these hours,
yes,
not outside of them.
thank you.
Okay,
And I might even add an amendment to 5 or 6 p.m.
Yeah.
rather than 3.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any other comments so far? Any questions? None in the audience? Any online? Not seeing any movement. All right. Let's see, let's scroll back down to where we were. So I think we're into home businesses. Not too many changes there. No changes. Home occupation.
As mentioned previously, we're just changing some of the numbering and lettering, just to read more easily.
Nothing there.
Believe this was a change in the state law, the separation between adult bookstores or other adult businesses. It was not allowed within 200 feet of a school, library, church, or other religious use or childcare facility, park, playground, or recreational area, and that is proposed to be changed to 1,000 feet. Currently, Paxton Municipal Light Department is not one of the departments that reviews plans. In this particular case, they would be added as a reviewing department for any use that would be connecting to the grid.
Oh, sorry, I think it's right at the bottom of A.
This is another one that requires, there's several of them that have added Paxton Municipal Light to reviewing and approving it. If connection to the grid is desired, the applicant shall obtain permission from Paxton Municipal Light Department.
Oops, sorry.
It used to be that 10 copies of full-size plans were required with applications. Seeing we do have digital copies now, or electronic copies, they're requiring 2 full-size sets plus reduced-size plans and the electronic copy. Once again, for proposed utilities, including distance from the source of power, size of service available and required locations for any proposed utility or communication lines, we're adding sign-off from Paxton Municipal Light Department. Adding that if there's any electromagnetic interference, it cannot interfere with the electrical distribution lines. And interconnection for wind energy systems has to have the permission of Paxton Municipal Light Department. Removal requirements for wind energy systems, the cost to detach from the grid, and removal of any hazardous materials if needed would be the applicant's or the owner's responsibility. The medical marijuana or marijuana establishments and medical marijuana treatment centers. A lot of this is just changing the terminology. Also, it used to be, now it's the Cannabis Control Commission, and there's different law sections that this pertains to. No marijuana establishment shall be located on a lot that is within, we're changing that to 500 feet to be in compliance with state law. And then adding also that any odor shall be effectively confined to the premises. Marijuana type uses, especially processing, uses a lot of electricity. And so in addition to the building commissioner, board of health, police and fire department, Paxton Municipal Light Department would like to review any plans for such facilities. Can we just look at the beginning of this subsection? Okay, approvals for the marijuana establishments. So within the application package, we need plans not only for signage but lighting. And then all marijuana cultivators shall conduct a study to determine the anticipated amount of electricity use and submit an energy use plan to the Paxton Municipal Light Department to demonstrate best practices for energy conservation. And the plan shall include all electrical system overviews and proposed energy demand and impact on the Municipal Light Department's distribution system. Whoops. Sorry. That's right. I do the same thing. some of the findings that have to be found. We added one that the marijuana establishment or medical marijuana treatment center adequately addressed potential impacts to the lighting and electric distribution system of the Paxton Municipal Light Department.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Are there any questions in the audience? Seeing none. Any questions from anyone at home? Okay, seeing no movements, we're gonna move on to section 4. Okay. Section 4 is the dimensional regulation. These rules and regulations provide guidelines for homeowners, builders in the town, such as minimum lot size, frontage, and setback requirements and height limit. The purpose of updating these regulations are to deliver some smoother operations for town departments once a subdivision is built, to establish compliance with the town's MS4 permitting system, which is municipal separate storm sewer system, and allows for the modernization of regulations that are clear and easier to understand. The regulations currently require wider streets, large paved turnarounds on dead-end streets, bituminous concrete berms along the edges of the roadway, sidewalks on both sides of the street, including minimum parking requirements, and allows for planting of non-native trees. The proposed changes are intended to meet the stormwater requirements that were previously outlined in the Fuss and O'Neill report by the town. Some of the proposed changes are intended to reduce the impervious surface area in subdivisions, narrowing street widths, providing for on-site rainwater infiltration, preventing runoff from entering the roadway, allowing sidewalks on one side of the roadway, and others. Various departments were consulted on these changes to ensure that the proposed changes meet the requirements for emergency vehicle access, road maintenance, and snow plowing, and the provision of town water and electrical service. Jane?
Accessory building or structure. Accessory structures in any district are limited to a height of 1.5 stories or 25 feet. No accessory building or structure shall be permitted within the required front yard area. No accessory building shall be located in any side yard or nearer to the side lot line than 10 feet, except when the side yard is a corner lot and is adjacent to a street. The minimum shall be 30 feet. No accessory building or structure shall be permitted in any rear yard area nearer to the side lot line than 10 feet, nearer to another principal accessory building than 10 feet. This is what we did was we did a strike through on the old dimensional table. I think you read the next one.
Oh.
This is the dimensional regulations, and just created a new one to clean it up a bit and also to add the multifamily. So to be in compliance with the Fuss and O'Neill study as far as trying to minimize impervious area, we have a maximum building or non-permeable coverage area as a percent, which in residential B is not applicable. In the multifamily district, it's 70%. You'll see when we get to that one in a couple of weeks that that would require 30% open space. That's why the maximum coverage is 70%. For the multifamily units themselves, buildings would be limited to 2.5 stories or 35 feet, minimum lot area of 80,000 square feet with the various setbacks. and lot frontage. Those definitions are just moved to the definition section in section 1. And that's why you see the strike through here.
I think that's the end of that section.
Okay.
Any questions? Any questions online on this section? Do not see any. All right. So, Jane, let's see here. Let's see, section 6, admin and enforcement. I think here predominantly, we just had grammatical and punctuation changes, so
Correct.
we'll get up, we'll just go through these. I don't think there's anything of substance.
Some of these are just adding hyphens or changing from singular to plural.
Okay, and that's it for that section. It's the fastest one we have. All right. Let's see here. All right, and section 7, so I'll come up for section 7, I think, because that's a little bit more. So section 7 is the floodplain district. So the floodplain district was established to ensure public safety, to reduce threats to life and personal injury associated with the risks of flooding, as well as other purposes outlined in section 7.1. This district was established to correspond with the floodplain as established by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and it limits what uses are permitted within the floodplain. Has some importance because amending this bylaw and reflecting the most recent flood maps and conforming to the state model floodplain bylaw will aid in achieving the purposes of establishing this district that includes reducing the risk of hazards associated with potential flooding, the occurrence of public emergencies, risk of loss of utility services, and damage to public and private property, among others. The current floodplain district was last amended on May 2nd, 2011, and was accurate and sufficient at that time. Since then, both FEMA as well as the Department of Conservation and Recreation for Massachusetts, DCR, have developed a state model floodplain bylaw. The proposed change here with FEMA is adding the updated flood maps for the communities located in the Nashua River watershed, which includes Paxton, and DCR is State Model Floodplain Bylaw. Section 7 is essentially amended to model or follow the model that the state has proposed, as well as to update the approval dates to reflect the updated flood insurance rate maps, or FIRM. So a lot of acronyms on this one. Jane?
Okay, once again, we're changing the formatting, the numbering, and lettering. These red changes reflect the dates of the newest maps. There may be a new map coming out next year, but this would be the current map, number and date.
Do we automatically update when new maps come out, even though you reference date of acceptance or publication? So if a map comes out in 2 or 3 years, do we just add that in as a footnote
I believe it needs to go to public hearing.
each time?
Yes.
Okay.
So the designation of the community floodplain administrator, that's for the town to decide who will be the floodplain administrator. And then the town requires a permit for any proposed construction or other development in the floodplain district. It has limitations on what can be done in that area. And that's in order to limit any risks of flooding or adverse impacts from flooding. And the permit review process includes the requirement that the proponent obtain all local, state, and federal permits necessary in order to carry out the proposed development in the floodplain district, and must obtain all of the, or acquire all the necessary permits. So all of this in red that you see here is based on the state model floodplain bylaw. There were a couple of other designations in the state model, but those areas are not included in Paxton, so they're not included here. In certain zones along water courses that have a regulatory floodway, encroachments are prohibited, which would result in the increase of flood levels, and that would include fill, new construction, substantial improvements, and other development within the adopted regulatory floodway, unless it has been demonstrated through hydrologic and hydraulic analyses performed in accordance with the standard engineering practice that the proposed encroachment would not result in an increase in flood levels. Within certain, the A zones, the FEMA-based flood elevation and the floodway data, the building department will obtain, review, and reasonably utilize the base flood elevation in reviewing plans. When proposing subdivisions or other developments greater than 50 lots or 5 acres, whichever is lesser, the proponent must provide technical data to determine base flood elevation for each developable parcel shown on the design plans. Recreational vehicles to be placed on a site must be elevated and anchored in accordance with the zone's regulations for foundation and elevation requirements, or be on the site for less than 180 consecutive days, or be fully licensed and highway ready. In a riverine situation, the floodplain administrator will notify the following of any alteration or relocation of a watercourse, including the planning board, the state floodplain coordinator at the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and FEMA Region 1. The requirement to submit new technical data. Some of the old language is eliminated and new language is proposed as in the model bylaw. The town, if the town acquires data that changes the base flood elevation on the mapped areas or special flood hazard areas, the town will, within 6 months, notify FEMA of the changes. And then there are requirements about how it will be submitted, including to DCR and FEMA. Variances. Variances to building code floodplain standards. The town will request from the State Building Code Appeals Board a written or audible copy of the portion of the hearing related to the variance, and will maintain this record in the community's files. And also issue a letter to the property owner regarding potential impacts to annual premiums for flood insurance policy covering that property. The issuance of a variance to construct a structure below the base flood level will result in increased premiums for flood insurance. And such notification shall be maintained with the record of all variance actions for the reference development in the floodplain overlay district. Variances to the local zoning bylaws to be to community compliance with National Flood Insurance Program. Any variances must meet the requirements of a good and sufficient cause and exceptional non-financial hardship. The variance will not result in additional threats to public safety, extraordinary public expense, or fraud or victimization of the public, and the variance is the minimum action necessary to afford relief. Abrogation and greater restriction, the floodplain management regulations found in this floodplain overlay district section shall take precedence over any less restrictive conflicting local laws, ordinances, or codes. Disclaimer of liability, the degree of flood protection required by this bylaw is considered reasonable, but does not imply total flood protection. And then severability, if any section, provision, or portion of this bylaw is deemed to be unconstitutional or invalid by a court, the remainder of the ordinance shall be effective.
Okay. Are there any questions here? Don't see any. Any questions at home? Not seeing any. All right, Jane, thank you very much. I'm going to hop up and come up for 13. All right, section 13 is on parking. So the off-street loading and parking bylaw, section 5.4, was established as a subsection of section 5 special regulations. The proposed changes included relocating the parking section to its own separate section 13. It also revises the pavement requirements to allow for permeable pavement, requires parking lot landscaping, vegetated swales adjacent to parking lots or stormwater to percolate on site rather than draining off the property. This again alludes back to our study from 2023 from Fuss and O'Neill. In this case, the town had completed a street design and parking lot guidelines and low-impact development report for the town of Paxton. The evaluation completed for the report is based on the EPA, or Environmental Protection Agency's general permits for stormwater discharges from MS4, the 2016 requirements. The result of the evaluation was recommendations for amendments to the town's bylaws and regulations in compliance. Town has 4 years from the date of issuance of the permit to come into compliance with stormwater requirements. The current bylaw requires bituminous or cement concrete material for parking lots, masonry, steel, or heavy timber bumpers, and concrete or bituminous curves and berms. Most communities have their parking and loading section as a separate section of the bylaws, as is the recommendation here. The amendments include the adjustments as mentioned above, including adding a clause that parking lot lighting shall not cause any public nuisance. It also requires that parking lots be designed to allow for stormwater to drain off of the parking lot and into vegetated swales intended for percolation of water on site. Jane?
Good job.
Okay. So as Heather mentioned, this was or is in section 5.4, and we're recommending that parking and off-street loading be in its own section 13. General purpose and intent, and the applicability is no building permit or certificate of occupancy shall be issued for the erection of a new building, the enlargement or increase of the net floor area, the development of a use not located in a building, unless off-street parking spaces, loading bays, and bicycle parking are provided in accordance with this bylaw. The calculations for off-street parking requirements may involve two basic calculations. I'm not sure if all of this is new or if it's just relocated. I think it's relocated.
Just all red.
There are a couple of inserts there. I guess we've got a new site plan review section that was also moved from section 5, and so we need to put the new section number in there.
I don't think we changed any of these numbers in this piece, correct? We go down
I
to
think, yeah.
exterior parking lot design. This is also relocated.
Here we go. And so that drainage does not run off of the site. We're recommending that we don't have curbing that forces water to run off-site. Rather, it would go into vegetated areas so it can percolate right on site. We would have permeable pavement or pavers to allow more percolation on site. And any lighting should not be cause a public nuisance. In the business district, it is recommended that off-street parking and loading spaces be placed in the rear of the building. Also requires that 20% of the parking area be landscaped. That will allow for additional pervious area as well as be more aesthetically pleasing. Minimum of 40% of the impervious parking area is to have shade with a mature tree by time it is mature. 30% of parking spaces should be compact spaces. For parking areas that will contain fewer than 10 spaces, compliance with the design standards set forth shall be determined by the zoning enforcement officer. And I'm not sure, LID parking area standards, that might be new. So LID stands for low impact development, and that's what we're talking about when we look at best practices for trying to reduce stormwater runoff and allow for more water percolation on site to recharge the aquifer. And so the design standards would be in agreement with the Massachusetts design manual. These are the layout requirements for different types of parking lot arrangements, depending on whether parking is parallel or at 45 degrees, 60 degrees, 75 degrees, or 90 degrees. And then we go into the landscaping standards, and again, it is in accordance with low-impact design or development design to provide landscaping and on-site drainage in agreement with the Stormwater Management Manual. And all acceptable LID techniques shall include vegetated swales, rain gardens, or bioretention facilities, permeable pavers, infiltration facilities, and constructed wetlands. Cisterns for gray water systems that recycle stormwater may also be included in those calculations. And we already had that one about the zoning enforcement officer for parking lots with fewer than 10 spaces. We also get into a list of plantings that are associated with vegetated best management practices, not invasives, preferably native plants. Identifying the location of areas reserved for snow storage so that snow with salt and other things that are put on the road do not get into local waterways. Location of the screening between residential and non-residential properties. Buffer zones shall be a minimum of 6 feet in width to allow for some screening, which it could include vegetation at least 6 feet in height. Location of test pits, the depth to the seasonal high groundwater and soil percolation rates for those areas designated for recharge. Schematic designs of any gray water systems for the parking area required, and any operation and maintenance plan should be submitted to the zoning enforcement officer or the planning board that conforms to the plans detailed in the Department of Environmental Protection Stormwater Management Manual. And again, a severability clause that if any provision of this bylaw is held invalid by a court of competent jurisdiction, the remainder of the bylaw shall not be affected thereby.
Thanks, Jane.
All right, just a question, Jane. I thought on parking lot lighting, if I remember when we discussed it, we had, I'm going to say, hours of full illumination up until like 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, but I'm thinking of like the college. They need to light it throughout the evening, but it doesn't have to be as bright as when classes are being conducted. So from 7 to 10 or 7 to 10:30.
Okay.
And then as long as they had what I'll call minimum illumination versus full illumination. I thought we had that discussion about that.
I can check with Gabe. I believe he worked on this section.
Okay, that was just a clarification there, because again, we don't want it to be fully illuminated all evening.
And sometimes I see communities will do that with signs such as electronic signs. So I'm wondering if maybe we're thinking signs rather than lighting, or,
Okay.
but I'll double check.
And then the other thing that just came to mind, did you have a definition of zoning enforcement officer? I didn't remember seeing it under,
I will check.
okay,
If not, we will create one.
there you go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, and our last section for this evening is Section 14, Site Plan Approval. So the Site Plan Approval bylaw was originally Section 5.6. It was a subsection of Section 5 Special Regulations. Proposed changes move it to its own section, Section 14, specifically for site plans. It also includes a requirement to have additional information showing electric, communication, cable, fiber, and provides for PMLP, which is the Paxton Municipal Light Plant or Department, to review site plans. A lot of communities already do this, already keep it as a standalone section. There's also a request from PMLP to have a plan for energy demand in advance of any anticipated demand in the event that it could be higher than average, so they have additional power that they can purchase. And these proposed changes include removing this section again from Section 5 and creating a new section here specifically for the site plan approval. Jane?
As with other chapters, we've got the numbering that has been modified. And we have added that electric communication cable and fiber should be added to site plans so that Paxton Municipal Light Department can review those. Spelled out Paxton Municipal Light Department.
That's it.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay.
There's no more after that.
The only comment I would make is I think there's a typo on page 1.
Page 1.
Keep going. It was, should have been and it was a capital R, Rand. I'm trying to remember where I saw it.
Oh, I saw that
Did you
too.
see that?
The edit where, the red line edit.
Maybe it was 2. Yep,
Yeah,
there it
right
is, after fiber.
Oh, yeah.
That was all, otherwise,
Oh,
good.
okay. All right, any questions in the audience? All right, any questions from anyone at home? All right, well, thank you everyone for attending this evening. As folks,
Before you stop, can I have just a couple of things that I wanted to.
sure.
On section 6, I'm sorry to make us go backwards.
Yep.
At the end, bear with me, let me just get to that spot.
You have a page?
I saw that there was a red line to replace, oh, so page 4, please. Nope, I'm sorry, that's the wrong spot. But there's red lines to change chairman to chair throughout, which I fully agree with. There is a spot where it says Board of Selectmen, and that should be changed to Select Board, page 3,
Oh.
sorry, bottom of page 3.
Yep.
Where it says vacancies shall be filled for unexpired terms in the same manner as in the case of original appointments. Any member may be removed for cause by the Select Board instead of Board of Selectmen upon written charges and after a public hearing.
Okay.
You mentioned the Fuss and O'Neill study from last year. Is my recollection correct that that study actually stated that we should stop requiring 2 sidewalks and change that to 1 sidewalk?
On one side of the street.
Right. Because I think it still said in here 2 sidewalks. Is that,
I think we changed it.
did it get changed? Oh, okay, perfect, great. I thought I heard when we were saying it, when we were going along, that it was 2. Okay, that is all I have. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Anyone from home have any additional questions? Not seeing any come through. All right, so I just want to remind people when our next sessions are here. I think I have that sheet, hopefully. Here we go, right over here. So the next session is next Wednesday, which is September 25th at 7 o'clock again. Next week, we will be trying to focus on housing-related sections. So Section 9, which is senior housing. Section 10, inclusionary zoning. Section 15, accessory apartments. Section 5, special regulations, and then subdivision rules and regs. Please note that we will try to get all of the info sheets up at the beginning of the week again, if not sooner, as well as the copies of the red line versions of the zoning bylaws. And then in the next few days after tonight, we will break this video down into some pieces and be able to put it with its relevant information online. If anyone has any questions or would like to offer any comment, please feel free to reach out to me. You can get me on my email, hmunroe, M-U-N-R-O-E, @townofpaxton.net. That's hmunroe, H-M-U-N-R-O-E, @townofpaxton.net. And thank you everyone for tuning in this evening. Have a good night.